Thank you for the introduction. I'm not sure Virginia's there.
Yeah, I'm not sure she's here yet, but that's okay. We'll just get started and wait for her to dive in.
All right.
So, William, I was really intrigued reading your bio and your backstory. Is there anything that you think our audience should know about you before we dive into questions today?
Uh, yeah, I guess what's not in the bio is that I've been in tech forever, and by forever, I mean 40 plus years. So I've seen the birth of personal computers. That's how old I am. And taught myself computer programming when I was very young, when I was 12 years old, way back in the day. And I've just seen a lot of progress in computing. And along with that progress, I've seen the wealth development that computation and tech has brought. And I've participated in some of that wealth creation. So that's what you should know about me is like, I'm not just talking about it, I've lived through this for the last 40 years. And that's the center from which I'm talking from.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for peeling back those layers for us. I think you're absolutely right. There's been a huge shift, even in the last 20 years, 15 years,
Yeah.
when it comes to the tech field and the opportunities and the industries and entire worlds that it's opening up for so many people. And you're right, that equity is important, and it is absolutely not a feature of basically anything that we, that people create, right? A lot of
Right.
it is down to first come, first serve, who's resourced enough to have access. And so I've never heard of this concept before, and I absolutely love it. So one of the things that we have talked about, or that we know is a thing that sometimes there's a prevalent attitude within DEI hiring, and that it always kind of seems to be someone else's problem. Can you kind of break down what you mean by that, and how you think that presents within the industry?
Yeah, I think what happens is that, well, there's so many things that happen when you say DE&I hiring, is that people think that it's a separate thing. And what I try to tell people is like, no, it's not a separate thing. It's primary to your business. You have to realize that as a business, you're after total addressable market, right? I mean, that's a common term. And that just means that you want to maximize the number of people you can sell your products to. And if you're thinking like that, you cannot possibly think that you're going to get the maximum total addressable market by having a limited viewpoint in the world.
Yeah.
So DE&I is a core critical piece of your business development strategy. It's not something that should be done on the side. It's not a checkbox exercise. And that's where a lot of people make mistakes. They think, oh yeah, and we have to hire, let's see, the list says 10 women, 20 blacks, 4 Hispanics, that's how people go about it. And it's like, well, that's ridiculous. So what you should be thinking is, how am I going to get more women to buy my product? How am I going to get more farmers in Tunisia to buy my product? You're not going to get that by hiring all one kind of person that comes from one school in one country. You're going to get that by expanding who you get perspectives from, and that's truly the core of DE&I. So anyway, that's the way I see it is DE&I is core to a business development strategy, and particularly now as we go forward in the world, and I mean, yes, we're globalized and we're all connected, and you can't increase your total addressable market unless you have a more diverse set of perspectives and you incorporate those into your product development. Whatever your product is, it kind of doesn't matter what the product is. It's like, if you're trying to expand your total addressable market, you have to have a diverse workforce. That's all there is to it.
Well, I love how you're bringing this back to not just the business use case, or why it should matter, but tying it directly into the dollars and cents of an organization.
Right.
It is something that you're right. DEI has been talked about, especially prior to 2020, was always talked about as a secondary or a tertiary concern, right? It wasn't top of mind. It wasn't in the triage list, but like later on, we can talk about it. And I think that that's one thing that I've seen change in the conversation that I really, really appreciate is the metrics showing like your products do better. There's, you know, your teams perform better, your customers are more satisfied. You know, these DE&I practices are not just beneficial to the people within the org or the culture. They are
They're
beneficial
to the
business.
company.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing, because until you really believe that, you as a company will just continue to struggle with this thing, because you just keep checkboxing, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I need some of these and some of these. Why? Because they told me. You know, it's like, well, okay. Meanwhile, your competitors who are a little bit more woke than you are gonna go and hire the right people and create the better product and have world scale while you're gonna languish, right?
Yeah. Well, and it makes a ton of sense. You know, if we look at people's life experience and we start to think of people and not just as a list of their qualifications or a list of their skill sets, right? We don't just look at them as here's what you're able to do, but if we look at them in terms of like what's going to diversify the picture, what's going to provide those different opinions and help us figure out where the changes need to happen. What can we try next? You know, you can't.
And it's also an attitude change from, we're not factory workers. We're not replaceable cogs in the wheel, right? We're individuals, and that's why you want humans. Otherwise, all the things that could be replaced by robotics and automated away will be automated away, and you're left with, so what do the humans bring to the table? And it's their lived experiences, and that's what you want to really incorporate, or else the products become, we're all just servicing the machine. So you want diverse perspectives, because otherwise, what do we bring to the table as humans?
Yeah,
right?
I mean that your skill set and your work history and what you can do is important, but just as important is knowing what, you know, the context, that the environments that person has been in, the you know, the things that they have had to work with or struggle through or, you know, had access to. You know, it's not all just like hard things that make diversity. It's also, you know, people that have a lot of resources and are able to understand that. So I love the idea of kind of thinking in terms of your relevant experience is not just the things that you put on your resume. It's also the things that make
your
you
lived experience. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So let's kind of back up a little bit here and talk about some of the initiatives that you have started. You work with Microsoft and you've started to facilitate diverse hiring there. Can you tell us, like, you know, some of the ways that you've been kind of getting this process moving?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying I just retired from Microsoft at the end of September.
Congratulations.
So I was there for 24 years. So I joined Microsoft in 1998.
No wonder you look well rested.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I say retired, but realistically, all that means is that I'm now coding full time for myself. So I never stopped coding. I just stopped getting a paycheck from them. So, but my journey in this space, I've always been an engineer at Microsoft, delivering product, managing engineering teams, building product, all that sort of stuff. In my bio, it says, you know, technical advisor to the CTO. But in 2015, and even before 2015, I started getting a bug for teaching our engineers how to be better engineers. And I joined a group called Engineering Excellence in 2005. This is inside Microsoft. And I went off and taught engineers in India for 3 years how to become better engineers. And then roll forward to 2015, and I just had this itch for what's a big problem to solve. And it turns out hiring diverse talent, women and underrepresented minorities, was just this big problem for some reason. And so I said, okay, I'm going to jump on that. And when I looked into it, I saw that we were spending millions of dollars, and every high-tech company is the same, millions of dollars on what we call diversity programs. And it was, a lot of it was what I would call pipeline, so K through 12 programs, this, that, and the other thing. But we weren't spending on actually hiring people. So it's like, I wonder where the disconnect is here. And it was several points, you know, everything from the bar to there just aren't enough of them, you know, all this sort of stuff. So I created a program called LEAP. And LEAP was about making that last connector between the talent that's out there, and the talent that's out there was in like coding academies, community colleges, moms returning to work, they had CS degrees. There's all sorts of talent out there in the world. They're just not on the critical path of hiring that places like Microsoft use, which is we go to the top 15 schools in the US. We get the top students from those top schools. They all also happen to be white males, and then that's it. That's the end of the story. If you didn't come through our intern programs, you don't get in as a college hire. And if you aren't already with 10 years of experience in tech, you don't come in as an industry hire. So there's no path for all these people that don't fit those two molds. So LEAP essentially said, well, that's silly because that's where all the women and minorities are. So let's create essentially a professional internship. And we did a cohort model. So we brought in, initially it was only 25 or 8 ladies actually was the first cohort. Then it was 25, then it was 50, and now they do mega cohorts of 150 or something. But we brought them in cohorts. We set them up with a 16-week internship, essentially. In the first few weeks, the first 4 weeks, they actually teach them, here's how you do engineering at Microsoft. So maybe they don't know our languages, Visual Studio Code, C#, blah, blah, blah. So we teach them all that stuff. We tell them what it's going to be like in their engineering team. And then they go and sit with the engineering team for 12 weeks and do essentially what college interns would do. And then at the end of it, they get a chance to get hired or not hired, right? So that's the program we started in 2015. It still exists today. It's now a federally accredited internship program, which is a specific designation that it has. We're worldwide. We run cohorts in Nigeria, Kenya. They just started up in Europe, we've done Canada. So it's just the way that, or one of the ways that we do hiring differently, I think they call it now. But some of the challenges were things like, really it was about training the hiring managers and how to look at talent different, how to interview different. And I actually had to change job descriptions to remove the requirement for a college CS degree, because like, why is that a requirement?
Yeah.
You
honestly, that's one of the things that I really like and I was most surprised by, honestly. So prior to joining Power to Fly, I had no experience in HR, in hiring, in tech, anything. And that was one of the things that made me the happiest when we first started talking with clients and looking at job descriptions and trying to find people to fill them, was like, that was what we would do. We would go through and say like, okay, here's the qualifications that you have. Can you talk us through why these are your minimum qualifications?
Right.
Because it was always stuff like that. It was
Right.
like, well, one of the requirements was a CS degree.
It's like, really?
Is that a thing that you have to have now? Like that's not the only way to prove value or to like signify, yes, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and we found that because the candidates we would get are people like, oh, I've got a master's in astrophysics and a PhD in mathematics and blah, 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 but no CS degree. It's like, are you kidding me? You're telling me that person cannot code?
No. They don't have the minimum requirements. Come on.
Oh, they don't have a CS degree. It's like, okay, we're going to bring them in. So yeah, it was just getting through some hurdles with my peers, really. Yeah. And flipping things on their head, and things like the bar, the classic the bar. They don't meet the bar. And just looking at each of those individual things and saying, those are barriers to entry. We need to be removing barriers to entry and opening up, we're opening up casting a wider net to catch more people, right? Yeah. So that's really what we did with that particular program, is to just remove barriers to entry and turn it into positives, so that we are now that we've had 7 years of these people coming in, they're superstars. It's like, oh my God, give me more LEAP people, because they're professionals. They've already been experienced. They're highly motivated, more so than college students.
Well, when I was in law school, it was the same way. Like the people that did the best were the returning students, like people who were, mature students, non-traditional, whatever, and people who had not necessarily, but like people that had been paralegals. They flew through stuff because they'd already been big kids. Right. They'd been, they'd been in the working world, and they were doing things they were doing things according to those rules, whereas the rest of us, like you said, we're still in the sandbox kind of.
Yeah. So that's what we've done. And that has led to various other programs because we did that. We took the arrows in the back essentially and cracked our company open and changed our culture.
Which has to happen,
Yeah.
people grow and companies change, but we can't take everything along the way with us. And it's important to do
Right.
that.
And
It was
I
really
think,
great, honestly, to see that transparency from Microsoft. Like that's
right.
walking the walk and
I
setting a
think
role model.
it's critical that Microsoft has a company mission, which is about empowering every person on the planet to achieve more. And they have a CEO who actually believes it,
Oh, there's the
and
trick right there.
yeah, I mean, it's like, if you don't believe it, then you just go, yeah, whatever. But he actually believes it, and he actually rewarded people or didn't reward them for their actions on diversity. So without that, we wouldn't have been as successful as we were. But since he supported it, and our HR leaders supported it, and various VPs of engineering supported it, the culture changed, right? Without all that, we would have been quasi-successful, but not as successful as it has been.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, on the heels of talking about those initiatives, tell us about Tequity. I want to know, what should we know about it? What are the goals of it? What do you want people to know?
Yeah, so Tequity, as we said in the beginning, is well, what is Tequity? It's my observation that if you look at the I don't know, Forbes 100. If you look at the top billionaires in the world right now, 6 out of 10 are tech related, right? I mean, the common names are like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but remember, Bill Gates was at the top of that list forever, and Steve Ballmer is still there. So there's a lot of. So what does that tell me? It tells me that the world right now is putting all its value behind technologists, right? Just like in the early 1900s, all the value was around industrialists, all the guys that were creating railroads and factories and stuff like that. But today it's about tech. What that means is that our society in general, the world in general, the rising tide is tech, right? And it will be for a while. So if you want to rise with that tide and not be drowned by it, you're better off having an equity stake in technology. And why is that? Well, what is an equity stake? An equity stake means that at the very least, you own stock in the companies that are doing well. Because equity through stocks means that as Apple does well, your stock increases in value, you now have something that's worth more than you had before. And that's quite different from just having a paycheck, right? If you just have a paycheck, even if it's a high-paying paycheck, if you stop working, you have nothing, right? Whereas if you stop working and you have stock in a company, you have continuing value. And if you pass away and you pass those stocks on to your offspring or whatever, they have lasting value. So to create intergenerational wealth, you need assets that last beyond your paycheck, right? And right now, the best asset to have are those that are based in technology. So it's stock in companies, it's patents in technology, it's owning companies of your own that are driven by technology. Now, that doesn't mean that your company has to be creating software. It might be that your advantage in the marketplace is leveraging technology, whether it's AI or automation or whatever. Anything you can do around getting yourself in a position where you're uplifted and carried along in your assets through technology, that's where you want to be. Because if you're not, then you're essentially just left behind, right? Because as that advances, and I'm not trying to scaremonger, but it's just the truth, is that advances, if you have no skin in that game, you just don't get to take advantage of it, right? So that's what Tequity is about, is looking at my tribe, of African Americans at the least, and saying, we don't traditionally have an equity share in technology. And when I say that to people, African Americans particularly, we want the big paycheck because we're looking to pay bills and stuff like that. We're not thinking long-term assets, right? So that's why it's important for me to say, no, we need to think about long-term assets. And here's what I know, because I'm a tech guy. Here's how you can get into the tech side of things, because I think that's the biggest accelerant right now. So that's what Tequity is about, is me going into the world and saying, let me help you get an equity share in technology. And I'm going to help you by helping create businesses that are tech-centered and stuff like that. So that's what it's all about.
That. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, and very necessary and needed work that needs to be done. So awesome. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about what that is going to then result in. I want to know how having Black people with an ownership stake in tech creation, how is that going to build that diverse tech sector, not just for people within the Black community, but also for other underrepresented groups? One of those things that we talk about is like, certain groups need help. There's more pressing issues. There's a lot of very, very, impressive and familiar phraseology around this. But the other thing that we think about is, a rising tide raises all boats. Diversity is good for everyone, not just for the one group being focused on. So when it comes to that kind of back and forth and interplay, what do you think this is going to result in for Black people as well as other communities?
I'll say, like, I'll use this example. So Hidden Figures, right? Katherine Johnson. What do you think the space industry would have been like if she had gotten funding after her stint at NASA? Rather than just becoming a school teacher, which is impactful, what would have happened? Might she have been the Elon Musk of 1960s?
These are the important questions to ask, right? Like, right? You're not just these things don't just impact people because they, if things were different, they absolutely would have done blah, blah, blah. It's not that, right? It's the idea of having the options.
Right.
Having that pathway accessible.
Right. I mean, it's like, what do you think is going to be more useful? Having all the resources in the hands of 1 or 2 geniuses or 30 geniuses, right? If you don't know what you're sacrificing or ignoring by not funding and not putting resources in the hands of the breadth of genius, not only in the Black community, but around the world. Yeah. I can tell you right now, the next innovations in personal finance and microfinance and things driven by, cell phones and all that, it's not coming from the US. It's coming from Nigeria. It's coming from Kenya. They have so many young people focus on microfinance. It just makes us look like children. So it's like,
this is also, it's an area that people don't think about, right? Like when we think about like, oh, the Chinese teach their children, coding from a very young age. So do the Japanese, like people, there's schools in India that have much more robust programming, educational opportunities than in America. So, it really, I feel like Africa is one of those places that people are not thinking about these differences and these pockets of undiscovered, untapped talent. And it really, I like that we're having these conversations because it is raising that visibility in people's minds. Like, you don't just need to go to Asia or one area of the planet. There are people everywhere, and you're right. That's a huge untapped market.
Right. So there's untapped markets, and there's also how does it help their communities, and how does it help us all? So if I went to Kenya, for example, and I visited this slum area called Kibera, and just imagine a city of 1 million people, and it's what we would call a slum. Now they have their own local government in there. They've got tribal leaders. They got all this stuff. I sat down with some of the youth, and it's like, hey, what are your aspirations? And it's like, yo, my aspiration is to eat, but these people had degrees in civil engineering and biology, and but they just live in a slum because there's no opportunity. So rather than what does Tequity do? Tequity says, go in there and help them get a leg up in tech. Maybe they can do some stuff locally, maybe it's related to creating AI models, who knows, right? But locally, if I can if I can help them create their own revenue locally and not just hire the best and brightest and pull them out and bring them over to the US, but if I can help them develop locally, that slum turns into a better living situation for all of those people. And that's great for them. And it's also great for the surrounding areas because there's less unrest, there's less strife, there's less need because they're self-generating. So they don't have to, we're going to have less population movement, less war, less famine if resources are, and I'm not talking about giving them a handout because
I was just thinking that. Yeah, like this is not a, oh, poor you. This is a, no, this equity should have been built into these systems. Because they're not, we now need to make some changes that will help get everybody, not necessarily everybody on the right path, but it's like we talk about with equity and inclusion. Everybody has shoes, but everybody's getting the shoes that fit them. Not everybody has to wear whatever's given. So like it's very much that idea of like giving them the things that they should have. We all should have.
Yeah, and I don't want to go in there, and I'm very aware when I'm in Africa or even the Caribbean, where I was just a month or two ago, you do not, and especially if you're from the US, you do not want to walk into a place as the colonialist, capitalist, I'm patronizing, you all need to wear shoes and skirts.
I know.
Stop walking around naked. It's like
blah blah blah. Yeah.
It's like, no, you need to walk in and you need to listen. And you need to be humble and you need to bring what you have and say, can you use these tools? I'm willing to help, and let it go where it's going to go. You might have an objective, but you can't be patronizing. You can't be the colonialist, or else you're just the new slaver. So you have to be aware of all that. But if you can help people transform their local community, then great. That makes the world better, right?
Yes,
that's all there is to it. And we get to leverage more of the geniuses that are out there. That are undiscovered.
Henry's chiming in the chat thread, also echoing this. The dollars not only flow into those communities, but the IT professionals become local, inspirational, and aspirational figures. Like so-and-so works for blah, blah, blah. And you get to put in that guiding light for younger people. And I think that's wonderful. It's something we always talk about, is that being the first or being the only in a room is important, but it's important that you're not the last, that you are bringing other people along with you. We are almost out of time. We were not able to get to all of our great questions, but William, I just want to say thank you. This has been wonderful to get to talk to you.
You're welcome. I want to give a shout out to Henry because he posed the Commodore PET. The Commodore PET was my first computer. So I know exactly what you're talking about with BASIC and Hunt the Wumpus. And I got a Commodore 64 sitting right under my desk right here. So, booyah, Henry.
Hey, I learned my typing skills in the computer bus 2 weeks a school year, that they would like drive out and park in the parking lot. It was like a gutted bus that had little laptop, or not laptops, little desktops in it that we learned how to type and how to play Oregon Trail. All right, y'all, that's going to bring us to the end of this session. But William, I'm so happy we got the chance to speak with you. I'm going to be sharing out some links in the chat thread here so people can keep connecting with you. But it was wonderful and I can't wait to speak with you again.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
Thanks.